Well, today our topic is marriage. Again, let me start with how J.I. Packer defines marriage in his book, Concise Theology. He writes, "Marriage is an exclusive relationship in which a man and a woman commit themselves to each other in covenant for life, and on the basis of this solemn vow, become one flesh physically." Marriage is an incredible thing that God calls many to. It signifies this union. We talk about union in Christ, and marriage is meant to have union between husband and wife. The two become one flesh. We hear that spoken at weddings, as well as we read it in the scriptures. But it's more than just that. From the very first marriage of Adam and Eve, we see this alignment and partnership. If you look at what was taking place after Adam and Eve became husband and wife, they set to work. They were working to unlock the potential that God had laid in the Garden of Eden, and they were aligned and partnered with it. They were focused on building something together. But how would they do it? We see glimpses of this in the Old Testament, but in the New Testament, you might remember a very famous passage read at many weddings from Ephesians 5. And it starts in verse 21, and listen to the nature of how this union is to be lived out. Paul writes, "Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ." Right out of the gates, marriage is supposed to be marked by mutual submission to one another. And then certainly Paul follows that command up with lots of details about how that looks for both husband and wife uniquely. But it begins with this idea of mutual submission. You can feel that sense of alignment and partnerships that you see in the marriage of Adam and Eve way back in the book of Genesis. And what happens is when we speak of marriage, it is often appropriate to speak of divorce. Almost every book that writes about marriage has some section writing about divorce. A verse that often comes up is from Malachi 2:16, where it simply says God hates divorce. And that may feel jarring depending on where you find yourself in your own marital history. But God doesn't just leave his comments on that. He doesn't just say, "I hate divorce," and never says anything else about it. There is biblical support for divorce being warranted in case of adultery, abandonment, and abuse. And as we look at the narrative of the Old Testament, we see that people that had been through divorce, especially women at that time, were particularly vulnerable. And God puts in protections to help them not be cast aside or really put permanently on the underside of power. And this topic of divorce was so contested and so debated that it actually follows us into the New Testament, where we see the Pharisees asking Jesus about his opinions about just this divorce. And I want you to hear this narrative. It comes from Matthew 19, verses 3 through 6. Listen to how Jesus responds to this question. It says, "Some Pharisees came to him to test him. They asked, 'Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason?' 'Haven't you read,' he replied, 'that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female, and said, for this reason a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore what God has joined together, let no one separate.'" Now, the practice of divorce for a variety of reasons had really taken root in that culture. And the Pharisees wanted to know where Jesus stood on that. And what I find more remarkable about the answer Jesus gives is that he doesn't quite answer their question. When Jesus is asked about divorce, the dissolution of a marriage, he points us back to God and his creation and his intention for that relationship. That the two will become one flesh, and that they will be united to his wife forever, and that no one would separate it. I think we see something really profound about Jesus and how he deals with divorce. Jesus is focused on the expressed will of the Father. He has a building, maybe a kingdom building mindset. He wants us to so be consumed with pursuing how marriage ought to be lived out that really divorce becomes less and less a viable option. I learned this insight from my ethics professor, Glenn Stassen, when I was at seminary at Fuller doing my master's degree. And he said that when we view marriage like that, when we view marriage first in this positive sense that Jesus did. Now again, Jesus wasn't naive to the real situations people find themselves in. We see Jesus dealing exquisitely with the woman caught in adultery. He has grace and compassion and yet calls her to sin no more. But I think that it's important for us to take the same mindset of Jesus. When we think about marriage and divorce, is to go back to what God intended first and be busy building such strong, healthy marriages that divorce again becomes a less and less appealing and viable option. Stassen wrote this in his book Kingdom Ethics to kind of sum up this point. He says, "This ethic focuses concretely on healthy marriage building and divorce prevention." So again, Jesus is not naive to how messy relationships can be, but his priority was always pointing us back to what God intended. I hope that's the same perspective we can take as we think about marriage together.